Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today's another special day. We get to talk about the BlackBerry Priv, and when this phone came out, I found it to be one of the more interesting phones of that year for sure. And I saw a lot of reviews of this phone, and I was just so confused and more so fascinated about a phone that looked so nice, and didn't have a home button, didn't have anything on the front, had a little bit of bezel, but had a slide out keyboard. And that was one of the most fascinating things about this phone. And every time I looked at it, even now when I look at it, I'm like, man, BlackBerry, if they went this route, they could have probably kept balling out and probably would have still been around, to be honest. As we know, one of the biggest evolutions that have happened since this phone's release happened just like a month or two ago, where pretty much BlackBerry is, I think they're going to be out. I don't think they're going to be producing phones anymore. Their company, I think it's called TCL or something, they pretty much said that they're going away from BlackBerry and they're not developing phones for them anymore, and they were with them for a while, and I believe they made this phone as well. So we really don't know what's going to happen if BlackBerry wants to sell their brand name and everything to a different company. I'm not too sure, but I guess we'll find out whenever. But this phone, they eventually made the BlackBerry Passport, BlackBerry Key 1, Key 2, all those phones, and I definitely do like those too, but I think this one is my favorite one out of all those. And this thing came out in 2015, so this year it will be turning 5 years old. And what's funny is that it really doesn't look that old, and it doesn't even look that bad, even with that keyboard. Now you can slide that keyboard in and out, whatever you want to do. Now when it's out, you can see that it takes up quite a bit of display. I mean, it looks like a pretty weird looking phone, to be honest. But when you slide it back down, it really doesn't look that bad. You have a front facing speaker, you have a pretty low amount of bezel. That top bezel is pretty thick, but again, this phone came out in 2015, and at that time, it still wasn't a trend to lower the bezel. You know, we had phones like the iPhone 6s, 6s Plus. I think the Galaxy S6 came out this year as well, so still there was quite a bit of bezel on these phones, and I think for sure BlackBerry did a really good job with this phone overall. Looking on the front, you have a 5.4-inch AMOLED display. It is a 1440p display, and I'll tell you one thing, this screen has definitely held up probably the best out of a majority of phones that came out in 2015, especially from a phone like this that pretty much flew under the radar. This phone definitely was crazy in terms of screen technology, and that's definitely one of my favorite things about this phone for sure. On the bottom, you can see we have a micro USB port, we have a headphone jack on this phone as well, and like I said, that screen was able to be moved up, and you were able to actually get access to that keyboard. Now that keyboard was a full QWERTY keyboard, which was really cool, but I see why this phone really didn't take off and why a lot of phones didn't take off at this time with those keyboards, including the Key 1 and Passport. Even though those phones are great sellers and those were great phones, I think there's just something about having a software keyboard on your phone that really makes the experience that much better. There's also a lot of things you can change. So I think this phone, even though it was more nostalgic and a lot of people liked it, I think a majority of people like having that software keyboard just because it's there and they don't have to swipe it up and down and all that stuff all the time. On the back, you have a single camera setup. A really cool thing, you have a micro SD card slot on this phone, which is really cool, and the fact that you have a thing like this and a keyboard and all this other stuff, it makes this phone quite a bit of a package even now in 2020. Really, since then we haven't seen a phone that came out with a keyboard like this, with a slide out keyboard like this. Of course, like the Passport, the Classic, the Key 1, those ones had keyboards, but those are still under the BlackBerry lineup. BlackBerry wasn't really only the one doing it, and it's sad because I'm sure a lot of people still use these phones, and a lot of people like BlackBerry and BlackBerry OS mostly because it was one of the more secure Android softwares out there, but at the same time, I think Android just in general is getting much more secure, so that kind of, selling factor is kind of going out the window now, to be honest, and it kind of shows because obviously BlackBerry isn't doing so hot. So that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. I really did like it. I think it was pretty interesting, and if BlackBerry can actually make another device, I hope they were to go this route instead of like the Key 1 or Passport route, but that's my opinion. Now, hitting on the software, this thing was released with the Android 5.1.1. It was upgradable to Android 6.0.1, and that was about it. It didn't get any more software versions on top of that, which is kind of expected, to be honest, because this phone, it really wasn't supposed to be like the Pixel competitor or anything like that. It was pretty much its own competitor. It really wasn't competing with anything because there was really nothing like it. I think that's one of the main reasons why the BlackBerry Priv might have taken off and done fairly well up until the Passport and Key 1, where I think those ones took up a little bit more market share. The BlackBerry Priv, I think, was a pretty decent device in terms of the software because it was very stock. It really didn't have anything going on it. It wasn't like the BlackBerry Passport. It was just very stock Android, and I love that so much about this device. It literally looked like the Pixel line, if I'm being honest. However, the software support for this thing was really bad. I don't even think it got a full year. It literally got like one update and that was it. And that's never a good thing. Even for an old phone like this, the longer the phone gets supported, basically the longer that phone will last. And that seems to be one of the biggest characteristics of Android manufacturers. They constantly go make a phone that's really cool, maybe has some gimmicks here and there, but it's a pretty cool looking device, but then they just release weird software on it, or they just don't extend the software that long. And I think the BlackBerry Priv fall under that for sure. And I think other big phone manufacturers like Samsung, they need to start stepping up, and they need to start supporting their phones for a longer time, because if they don't, another phone manufacturer will come out and be way better than Samsung and extend their software support, and then basically Samsung will lose more phone shares. So I think the BlackBerry Priv kind of fall under that, but by like 30 times more, because it only got one version of Android more, and then that was it. So it's kind of weird how phones that usually don't do so well in the market or whatever tend to not get the most software updates either, which is weird, but I think that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the software standpoint. Now, hitting on the performance side of things, the BlackBerry Priv came out with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 chipset, a hexa-core CPU, and Adreno 418 GPU, and there was only one model of this phone, the 32 gig model, with 3 gigabytes of RAM. Now, with those specs, it really isn't that bad of a device if you think about it. Okay, that Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 isn't really the newest thing anymore, but it had a hexa-core CPU and it had 3 gigabytes of RAM. Where back in 2015, it wasn't unheard of for a phone to have 3 gigabytes of RAM. There were a lot of phones, the 6S had 2, and because this thing was pretty stock at its core, it didn't really have a lot of things going on in the background either, which is a huge plus for this phone. And what I can tell you about the performances is that, it's not bad, and I think it's actually fairly smooth for the device being as old as a 2015 phone. If I were to compare this phone to like a Samsung Galaxy S6 or S6 Edge that came out that same exact year, I would definitely tell you that the S6 would probably not be as fast or as smooth as the BlackBerry Priv. I've owned many S6s and S6 Edges, and I can tell you that there's some pros for those phones for sure, but the BlackBerry Priv is one of those phones that I think because of its software, it just makes this phone so polarizing, because it's stock software, but it's not the newest software. It didn't get that many software supports, or years of software support. I can't even talk today. So I think in terms of performance, the BlackBerry Priv, I think it gets more of a thumbs up. I would say it's a little bit above average of what you're expecting. I think if you drop this phone now in 2020, it's not a good phone. If you compare it to all these other phones, the Galaxy S20s, even the Galaxy S10, it's not a good performing phone at all. But when you think about back in 2015 and you remember that this phone is a 5-year-old phone, that really makes this thing seem that much better in my opinion. So I think this phone in terms of performance is good enough in 2020, but I don't think it's something you would actually go and like try to use, because it's not going to be as fast, but it's going to be good enough, I think. So I think that really pretty much covers it up in terms of the performance. Now, hitting on the camera, this thing had a single 18 megapixel camera on the back that had optical image stabilization, which is cool. On the front though, it had a 2 megapixel camera. I don't know why the heck they did that. They always do some weird things. I don't know why companies always do this, but on the back camera you were able to shoot 4K videos, which is really cool, but you only did 1080p at 60 frames, so it's okay. It's not the end of the world, but it would have been cool if we got like 1080 at 120, but also this came out in 2015, so it's totally understandable. Now, what I can tell you about the camera quality is, like I said before, it's more or less what you expect. It gets the job done. It's not really even that great of camera quality, if I'm being honest, but the biggest downside of this phone would definitely be the lack of camera hardware features. Like I've stated before, you should at least have like a dual camera setup in 2020. If you don't have that, then you're already kind of setting yourself up short, because honestly, all these other phones that are coming out this year, they're going to have like triple camera, quadruple camera, even 5 camera setups. And if you have a phone that has a single camera setup, even if it's like an iPhone XR or something like that, you're kind of already selling yourself short, because phones are only gaining more and more camera sensors. So that's one huge thing you have to keep in mind. So I think in terms of the BlackBerry Priv, it's a good camera for decent quality for being a 2015 phone, but it would definitely not be my first choice. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3400 milliamp hour battery. It's actually 3410 milliamp hours. It does have wireless charging, which is really cool. And in terms of the battery life, what I can tell you is it's not bad battery life. It's actually pretty decent. I think overall they could have probably done a better job had they done a couple things here and there, but I think that's besides the point. This thing has a pretty high resolution screen, and a pretty big screen at that, and a keyboard to power. But even other than that, the battery life on this phone was definitely probably one of my favorite things for sure. It's not a bad battery life at all, and I think BlackBerry really knocked it out of the park with this. I noticed that basically all my BlackBerry phones have pretty decent battery life, so that's probably one of the biggest selling factors of a BlackBerry Priv, or really any BlackBerry phone. So to kind of sum up the video and to answer the question, should you pick up a BlackBerry Priv in 2020? I'm going to say probably not, because the software is so outdated that it's pretty insecure to do it. The other thing is, even if you root in customer custom ROM, and I'm not really too sure if there's a root or custom ROM for this thing, but there's really not going to be a big community behind this thing because a lot of people don't own it anymore. That's going to be one huge disadvantage if you pick this phone up, and that's a huge thing to consider. So what I would tell you is that instead of picking up a BlackBerry Priv, I would recommend picking up at least a Google Pixel 2 XL or Google Pixel 2. Those two phones will do you much better. I'll leave a Pixel 2 XL down in the description actually. That one makes more sense because that one has about the same screen size of the BlackBerry Priv and all that stuff. So the Priv is a good phone, but I think you should probably pick up a Pixel over this phone. So if you want to pick up a Pixel 2 XL for the cheapest price, I'll find on Amazon. I'll link it down in the description below so you can get it from there, help support the channel at the same time. But that is pretty much it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those things are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.